Hello everyone, and welcome to this second episode of the human trafficking discussion brought to you by the Community Voices Zimbabwe. Today we have Gerald Shirichena, the director of the Fukahane Trust, and Locadia Mavhudzi, who is the Women's Coalition of Zimbabwe Midlands Chapter chairperson. They will help us discuss on how the Covid-19 pandemic has exposed the girl child to human trafficking and what solutions can be provided, and also what the government, civil society organization, and the media can do in order to help solve this challenge. I'm Perseverance Janagwe. To kickstart our discussion, let's hear from Mr. Shirichena as he unpacks the effects of COVID-19 on the human metrics in Zimbabwe.
COVID-19 has had some effects on human trafficking matrix in Zimbabwe because the vulnerability of the people was increased when they were not be able to go to work or to school. So there was so much of gender-based violence in the homes. There was so much of runaway children, and these people become more vulnerable to traffickers because they'll be running away from situations at home that they cannot contain. We are told by the papers that the organizations that are dealing with gender-based violence, there's so much increase in this in gender-based violence during the COVID-19 period. And this is why we say all these people that have been in these vulnerable situations, they become more vulnerable and they go out, they try to run away from the situations, and they fall prey and they're prone to the traffickers.
So just to add to that, Mr. Shirichena, from your view, how would you measure the rate of COVID-19 pandemic on the human matrix in Zimbabwe?
Due to the complexity and the clandestine nature of human trafficking, coupled with the lack of authentic data on human trafficking, it is very difficult to measure the impact of COVID-19 on human trafficking. However, basing on the trends, movements of people to and fro seemingly human trafficking situations, some impact assessments show that COVID-19 has actually had an impact on human trafficking. We can safely say there was an increase in human trafficking activities during lockdown. The lockdown has made vulnerable groups to move from one city to another and across the countries. The girl children, they became more exposed to, since there is no school and they loiter in the streets and they have a lot of free time to be on social media, which has become a major recruiting point for traffickers. During the COVID-19 peak periods, the borders were closed, but the movement of people never stopped. People were moving in hundreds, going to South Africa. They were moving from rural to urban and even to other smaller urban settlements. This has actually increased the vulnerability of the people because they'll be trying to look for something to sustain their livelihoods. One point that we noted that during COVID, it worsened the situations of people that are in seemingly trafficking or exploitative situations because the handlers or the people that are enslaving them, they were not allowing these people to go out. Even those people that are in domestic servitude, they could not go on off because the employers or the handlers, they were afraid that they will bring in the infection. So it worsened some situations. Even those that are in sexual exploitation, we noted that in as much as they would not be going out in the streets, there was this clandestine nature that is associated with commercial sex, that the younger children, it was now easier for the handlers of these children to keep them in house, and their clients just peep through, just pass through, they just get in unnoticed in these houses.
Mr. Shirichena, I understand you have dealt with some cases of victims that were trafficked during the pandemic. What can you tell us about your experiences during that period?
The victims that we encountered, they told us of experiences during COVID-19 that were very traumatic. Many were not allowed to go out. There were stringent measures for them to stay indoors in the places where they were working from. They literally could not go home. Some people that we met, they told us that they were actually sent off, they were actually fired from work because of trying to get out of the place, because the employers, they thought they would get infected. And some of the victims told us that they contracted the COVID-19 virus, but they were denied medication. I remember meeting some people in the just after Bedbridge. The ladies were very sick, and asking them, they told us that they were not allowed to go to the hospital, so they had to run away, and we tried to help them to get medication. We believe some victims might have even lost their lives, and no one knows what really was happening because of the clandestine nature of human trafficking.
So what can you tell us about the surveys that you have done? Why was the girl child more impacted by human trafficking during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Because of COVID-19, the girl child was affected by human trafficking because they became targets since they were not going to school. Some, they actually dropped out of school. They could not afford the extra lessons and the online learning. A quick survey that we did during the COVID-19 was at Lutumba, where most illegal or irregular migrants, they gather for them to go to South Africa via the illegal crossing points. There was so much of small girls, ages of 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, that were moving into South Africa, but when schools reopened, the numbers were not equal the numbers that went to South Africa. So the girl child, they became more vulnerable. They became a source of income, even for some guidance and parents, because things were difficult for them, and the only thing that they could do, if a girl goes out and he brings in something, then it was okay. We have witnessed a lot of runaway children during the COVID-19 era, and these children, they were running away from the situations at home. It was either hunger, it was either abusive relationships at home, where the stepfather or even the stepmother or uncles and aunts, they started ill-treating the girl children because they were in luck. They wanted something to feed those children with, and the ill treatment was basically to force them to move out of the house, and which makes them more vulnerable to traffickers.
The girl child continue to be heavily impacted by human trafficking. But what can be done by the different sectors in the country to curb this challenge? Let me throw this question to you, Loka. What can the government, the civil society organization, and even the media, what can they do to solve this problem?
Thank you so much for raising the issue of human trafficking that is rising in our province. I think what we need to do is to strengthen social protection mechanisms for vulnerable children, especially child-headed families and orphan-led families, and those families that we see that they are in distress. I think the government should strengthen social protection mechanisms through offering grants for survival, through offering zero-cost access to education, access to health, so that they also will be able to live a normal life, and they do not become targets for human trafficking. We realize that this is a challenge that affects mostly the youth-aged people who are young people. So we need to strengthen young people's activities and access to resources so that they'll be able to be doing something. They can be busy with their own lives, be it in terms of education or in terms of doing business, the small businesses or anything that they can engage in that keeps them busy. Then also in terms of CSOs, yes, the CSOs cannot work alone. They also have to be on the alert side and work with community leaders to identify if there are any challenges that pertains to children who are targets of human trafficking. So it's not a one person's responsibility or a one-sided responsibility, but it needs an all stakeholders approach for us to curb the challenge. The media on the other side can also bring out these issues in various media platforms like radio, on television, on newspapers, and even online, to say this is a challenge that we have in our communities. Let's all have our eyes open and be alert and be able to report any of such cases. I thank you.
The COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that we need to develop strategies on how to continue anti-human trafficking activities on a national level. Everyone is a possible victim of human trafficking. Therefore, let us all play our part. Let us all do our best to play a role in ending this challenge. As Loka said, let's strengthen social protection mechanism for the girl child. And Perseverance Jabangwe for the Community Voices Zimbabwe. See you in the next episode.